Good morning, Texas Realtors. Thank you for joining us for a discussion looking back at the regular session of the 87th Texas Legislature. I'm Jamie Lee, Director of Advocacy Communications. I'll run through a few housekeeping items and then introduce you to our panelists. This session is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link to the recording after it concludes. If you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box, and staff will do our best to address them as time allows. So please join me in welcoming our 2021 Chairman, Marvin Jolly from Plano, Texas. Good morning, sir.
Hello, Jamie. Good to see you.
Thanks for joining us. We also have Trey Bates, Vice President of Governmental Affairs.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here with y'all.
And Julia Parento, the Association's Director of Public Policy.
Good morning.
We're also proud to welcome Brandon Alderetti, Director of Political Affairs.
Good morning, everybody.
So our goal with this session is to discuss the atmosphere of this year's unique legislative session. We're going to highlight the passage of several Realtor-supported bills, and we're going to demonstrate how Realtor engagement ensured these victories. And this is going to be an interactive session. We are going to have a few poll questions that'll pop up throughout the session, and we're going to launch the first one now. So registration for the 2021 Texas Realtor Shaping Texas Conference is now open. Will you be attending this year? The conference will be in Houston, September 9th through 12th, and it's going to be packed with great information and events. You can get details at texasrealestate.com/conference. So I see the numbers are coming in. Oh, we're so excited. This will be our first in-person conference since we had to go virtual last year, so we're very excited. Let's give it about 3 more seconds. 2 and 1. Let's close the poll. So what I'm seeing is that people are coming. They're going to come in person, and some of you just haven't registered yet. So get to texasrealestate.com/conference, get your registration in. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. Let's just dive in. We're going to run through several issues that came up during the legislature this year. So I'm going to call on Trey and Julia. This session was very unique. What was a day at the Texas Capitol like for y'all as you were leading our lobby team? Trey, do you want to share your 2 cents first?
Sure. It was an interesting session, like you said. It was unique because we didn't know what kind of session we were going to start with. It was like COVID put this kind of cloud of uncertainty over everything that was going to happen in session. We didn't know if the legislature only had an appetite to just pass the budget and then just call it done. We didn't know if they were still going to do any other business. We didn't know if we had access to the building or not. All of those things were uncertain at the very beginning, and we didn't know what to expect. But as things started kind of opening up and they started establishing rules and access procedures and all those different things, it became quite evident through conversations with elected officials that they wanted to do business as usual. And it quickly got to that point after bill filing. It turned into like, wow, okay, we're on. Let's do this. And so it really it came from like a really slow crawl the first month or so. And then it just sped up real quick in the last 90 days. It was just a frenzy. I'd love to hear Julia's take on it as well.
Well, yeah, as Trey said, it was a strange entry into session. Usually the beginning of January and February is filled with a lot of getting to know you kinds of events, not just for advocates like us, but for the legislators and for their staff. And there just was not an opportunity to do that this year, unfortunately, with all the COVID protocols. So it kind of came down to the very end of session, and session is always compressed a bit because there are some rules that prohibit the legislature from actually taking substantive action in the first 60 days of session unless the governor has declared an emergency item. And he did do that with a couple of things this session. But otherwise, everything kind of gets pushed to the last 80 days anyway. And this year, it really felt like all of the business happened in those last 80 days. And I'm fond of saying, when you're sitting at the top of that roller coaster and knowing that there's a bunch of stuff about to happen, think about what we're going to know, 3 months from now. And boy, did our lives change. We learned a lot in between March and May. And thankfully, by the end, people were able to, be face to face and spend some more, in-person time together and actually build some good relationships relationships. So we're hopeful that that will be good going into the interim, and all, you know, these multiple special sessions we're probably going to have, and we'll talk more about that later.
So Marvin, every session, Texas Realtors leaders like yourself testify in support of legislation that benefits real estate profession. So you were able to continue this important work despite these challenges. Will you tell us what that was like?
Oh, it was really an interesting process, Jamie, and it's one that is a reminder that as chairman of Texas Realtors, it's a privilege to speak on behalf of 140,000 members of our association, as well as countless property owners across the state. So I'm going to go into a few details and kind of pull back the curtain. Our staff had done a great job of staying in touch with our legislators, staying in touch with their staff members in the offices, the committees on where our issues were coming through the pipeline. So then I was called to step in and provide comment at a couple committees. When I got to those committee rooms, it was so interesting that I felt like our staff had prepared the legislators and their staff members the room. They knew where we were. They knew what our positions were. They wanted to hear from Texas Realtors. They, in many cases, they place the testimony of Texas Realtors as strategic points during the day, whether that's at the very beginning to set the tone or at the very end as closing comments. It was really interesting to know that while the Capitol is a big place and the legislative process is very complex, Texas Realtors has strong connections behind the scenes that work in the best interest of our members and property owners. I was given the opportunity to share our thoughts on several bills and was well prepared by staff. We game planned it. Again, kind of pulling the curtain back here, we game planned the conversations. So when I was up, I was able to deliver the comments that were in the best interest of our members and property owners. And it was well received by our legislators and those committee members. It was really enlightening and encouraging to see the process and how Texas Realtors is at the table at key times and on key issues.
Perfect, Marvin. So we use the word engaged quite often when we're discussing realtor advocacy. And one of the strongest ways that realtors engage during the session is attending an event known as Realtor Day at the Texas Capitol. So I'm going to call on Brandon now. Will you tell us how this year's event was so different and why it is still so important?
Absolutely. You know, in normal years, we have Realtor Day at the Texas Capitol. It's our biggest event. In 2019, we welcomed nearly 3,000 Texas Realtors to the headquarters here for one day. Of course, in 2021, as was outlined by Julia and Trey, it looked a little different. The Capitol was closed to big groups, and so it became evident that we were going to need to do something different. And this year, we took it virtual, and we used the association's Zoom platform to conduct 181 meetings over 4 weeks. And just sit with me here for a second and do the math. That's an average of 45 meetings per week. That's a lot of Zoom meetings. So it was great. It had a lot of benefits. It's super important, Jamie, because no other group attempted anything even close to this. When they were reading the Senate resolution, which was done by Senator Buckingham, the lieutenant governor, when she said that, you know, the Texas Realtors were meeting via Zoom with all legislators, the lieutenant governor actually said, "Wow." And that was really that kind of sums up Realtor Day at the Texas Capitol, that the event that we did and the undertaking that it was. Wow, it was a lot of work, and it was worth it. I think we exercised our capabilities. I really have to commend our key contacts and the lead contacts for each legislator. We've shown that we can pivot to an online-based advocacy platform without, you know, too much issue. We provided all the resources, of course, through the Realtor Day, you know, homepage, landing page, where Key contacts could access customized talking points and information about their lawmakers and all that things that the realtors have become accustomed to. But with the virtual platform, it actually opened up a couple of really interesting things. For one thing, from the staff perspective, I can speak for myself and other staff members. We were able to attend a lot more meetings than we normally would have, which gave us the opportunity to give instant feedback to our lobby team. In one case, I know that I texted one of our lobbyists and they were able to get into an office about 45 seconds after I texted and said, hey, just following up. They were the legislative staff was actually still on the Zoom meeting with us when our lobbyist walked in. And that kind of feedback and that kind of instant visitation or instant touch from our lobby team to the lawmakers is just gigantic and really shows our power. And I mentioned earlier that we have shown great ability to pivot to online-based advocacy. And while we certainly please hope that we'll be doing a live Realtor Day at the Texas Capitol in 2023 over one day, I don't think that the Zoom-based advocacy is going anywhere. Why would it? We can certainly, have pop-up meetings with lawmakers and their staffs if we need to get a key point across. So I think, we've shown comfort with it. We've shown that we have the technological capabilities. We've shown that we have the expertise to handle it. So I would look for, some version of Zoom-based advocacy or web-based advocacy to continue.
So Marvin, actually, I believe you were in the Senate chamber when the infamous wow was said, when the Senate resolution was being read. So could you tell us from the member perspective, why is an event like Realtor Day at the Texas Capitol so critical for the association's legislative agenda?
Sure, that's a great question, Jamie. And in fact, I have to add to Brandon's thoughts there. The other thing that Senator Patrick, Lieutenant Governor Patrick said in that process was, he actually stepped up to the microphone and said, I was just talking to the realtors last week and their market is tough and their inventory is low. So he acknowledged the strong relationship that we have with leadership and actually quoted some of our statistics on the Senate floor. So what a privilege that is for us to have that relationship. Realtor Day at the Capitol is so crucial. I remember specifically my first trip to Realtor Day many years ago, and I know it was literally a turning point in my realtor journey. It was not to exaggerate, it was a life-changing event when I first experienced that. And I know several other of our members reflect positively finally on their first time. And we all remember the lines of realtors wrapping around the Capitol. We know that legislators are both excited to see us, but then also they get a little bit, they itch a little bit of, the realtors are here, and what are they going to ask for at this point? So it's the energy, the momentum, the excitement, the engagement is just, it's like nothing else. And then also a big part of Realtor Day typically, and I know it'll come back, is we end up over at the Texas Realtors building across the street. We eat some barbecue, and then we typically have an open house where members who have not gotten a chance to tour our building are able to walk through and visit with staff and kind of just get that tangible touch of the Texas Realtors headquarters on San Jacinto. And it is like no other experience. So if you haven't been able to do that in the past, watch for it in the future. As Brandon mentioned, we'll continue to have the Zoom virtual connections with our legislators. And also, don't miss the opportunity to travel to Austin, to be with our members at the Capitol and to go to the headquarters building. It's unbelievable.
Excellent. That is a great reminder that in all things, the association is member driven in the advocacy and our events and a process every step of the way. So let's get into some specific issues and bills that came up during the session. So before we do that, let's have another great poll question. For this one, we're going to ask, what was your top issue for the 2021 legislative session? And we have a few options: property taxes, state budget, public education, or maybe something else that was on your radar. And I think we're just waiting on that to launch, and then we'll give you a few seconds to vote. what was your top issue that you followed during the legislative session? We have a strong lead in property taxes. That is always a top issue for us, especially, but definitely the legislature. Let's do about another 3 seconds to vote. 3, 2, 1. We can close the survey. Yep, we have a winner. Property taxes, of course, certainly an issue that we are strongly engaged in throughout the year, not just during this session. Well, now that we've gotten some context for the unpredictable session, let's get into the real estate related bills that ultimately passed both chambers and are on Governor Abbott's desk to be signed into law. Disclaimer, quick note for anyone who's going to be watching this as a recording. The status of the bills we're about to discuss are as of this minute, the morning of June 16th. It's about 10:15 a.m. And the governor has until June 20th to either sign or veto the bills, or they automatically become law. So please keep an eye on the association's communications channels. We're getting out the latest information. Okay, I'm going to put Trey and Julia in the hot seat. One of the biggest victories for realtors this year was the passage of legislation to reform homeowners associations in Texas. Trey, what do our members need to know about this bill?
Well, that certainly was a bill that we spent a lot of time as your lobby team working on. It was interesting because as we started into the session, as we mentioned earlier, it was an unknown. And we'd been talking during the interim before session about HOA reform. And we've been talking about that for many years, as a matter of fact. But during this interim, it was a big topic. So we walked into this session not knowing whether we could do much with any of our major priorities because we weren't sure the legislature was ready to take them on. But as we started getting into it, as we said earlier, it became evident that there was a lot of HOA interest among the legislature. Many members had filed small little HOA corrective measures and maneuvers throughout the bill filing process that we were observing. And we're like, man, there might be some interest here. And so we kind of started talking a little bit more about HOAs, and we were getting a lot of positive feedback. And we said, okay, great. This is our chance. The door's cracked. So let's just push this door wide open and see what we can do with HOAs. And we rolled out an HOA bill that was pretty extensive. It's not quite where it needs to be yet because we know that we can only take as big a bite as we possibly can during session and get consensus behind it. But we took a pretty large bite this session, and we're looking forward to continue working on that. But it's an exciting bill for us. I could spend this entire webinar talking about it because it's probably one of my favorite topics right now because we spent so much time on it. I kind of broke our entire bill down into 4 pages of notes about what it accomplished on behalf of property owners and on behalf of making realtors' lives easier. There's two modes of the HOA bill, which I like to look at. There's the transactional side. What can we do to help our members and property owners during the transactional process and remove some of those gotchas and surprises? So there's an element of the bill that deals with that. And then there's a much bigger piece of the element of the bill that talks about how do we live under HOAs and how can we make things more transparent and more provide a little bit better due process for property owners and a little bit better input and information available to all the parties involved, including realtors and property owners. So that's kind of the genesis of what I would like to describe the HOA bill about. But Julia might have some additional details to add.
Thanks, Trey. So Trey said that he distilled the HOA bills, Senate Bill 1588, to be clear, by Brian Hughes and Chris Turner in the House. Before the meeting here, I was working on distilling the bullet points just for this presentation down as much as I could, and I still have an entire page. So I'm going to try to go very quickly. Senate Bill 1588 did a whole bunch of stuff. Trey said we could talk for an hour on this bill alone. And in fact, let me plug that our legal department will be doing a webinar in a little over a month where they're going to go into some of the nitty gritty on legislation that is passed and how it will actually function as law going forward. So I believe that's July 22nd. Keep an eye out for that. So Senate Bill 1588 became a really big thing. It was comprehensive when it was filed by Senator Hughes, but it got added to along the way in ways that we think are really great for consumers, for people, as Trey said, whether you're transacting in a homeowners association or just trying to live there. So the bill as filed did a whole bunch of things, but primarily it was focused on transparency. You know, Texas Realtors loves transparency measures. And we were hearing so much from all of y'all that it's really, really difficult to get good information on the kinds of documents that you need from the homeowners associations or the management company as you're working on those transactions. So the bill requires that a number of those things are going to have to be posted on an actual website. So the governing documents, but also meeting notices and minutes and things like that for the association members, so that they can, you know, participate in their board as they're doing their business. In addition to, you're probably all familiar with the county property records that host the dedicatory instruments and management certificates. So in addition to the county records, going forward, we are now also going to have all of the management certificates be filed in a centralized, publicly searchable database at the Real Estate Commission. And so you'll have a one-stop shop for management certificates. And we should also note that the management certificates are going to have to contain a phone number, an email, and a web address, which is not a requirement right now. So you'll be able to find all of that in one place, and we're hoping that that will be really helpful to you and to property owners within HOAs going forward. There's also, the bill contained a bunch of things related to protection of credit information and also protection of tenant information. So no longer are homeowners associations going to be able to obtain even a redacted copy of leases. They're going to be able to get a certain set of information, and that's going to be it. So as the bill went through its process, I mentioned it got added to, and that was because, as Trey said, there was a lot of interest from the legislature in homeowners association reform. After years of kind of being a little stagnant on that front, they really went after it this year. And so we had so many bills filed, and as Senate Bill 1588 really got the momentum going through the process, there was an opportunity to add to it with some of those other bills that got filed. And there's a whole bunch of things that got added to it. I'm only going to touch on just a couple, but one was adding a little bit more teeth if an HOA fails to file those dedicatory instruments and the management certificates. If they don't file their dedicatory instruments that allow them to collect assessments, they're not going to be able to collect assessments. And there's some additional penalties that property owners can recover if that information is not available the way it's supposed to be. They are also going to be required to put out for bids, not necessarily accept the lowest or anything like that, but put out for bids when an HOA is looking at engaging in a contract that is really expensive, more than $50,000. And they're also not going to be able to prohibit property owners from putting up some specific security measures, some certain types of fencing, security cameras, things like that. So all of it, again, was really pro property owner and hopefully will be a benefit to you as you're working with your clients in those transactions. And I forgot one thing. The bill also put a cap on resale certificate fees. That was so at the beginning. Sometimes we got so excited about all the amendments that came at the end that we forget that was early on. That was in the original version of the bill. So resale certificate fees are going to be capped at $375 going forward, and $75 if there needs to be an amendment for that. We know that there's a whole bunch of other fees that y'all deal with, especially related to the transaction, which is why the management certificate is now also going to contain information about what those fees are. Not all of their fees, not all of their assessments, everything like that, but anything that's related to the transaction is now going to be included in that just filed at the county property records, and at the Real Estate Commission, those transactional fees will be included in that document. So again, we could go on and on about this for hours. What I will just sum up and say is that this bill, Senate Bill 1588, we're so grateful for the legislature, for all of y'all for taking such a keen and active interest in it. But we know there's more to do. And the legislature is prepped and ready to go for next time.
So Brandon, Julia mentioned the realtor engagement, and honestly, that was a huge reason why the legislation passed. Could you talk to us about what this looked like?
I would be absolutely delighted to talk to you about why realtor engagement helped pass this bill. So just so everybody on the webinar knows, during the legislative session, the Political Affairs Department is supporting the policy staff, the lobby team. And we will help in any way they need to get bills passed or kill bills, whatever they need. So taking a step back, I will just say that few things evoke as much passion as homeowners association, whether you're talking about realtors, homeowners, even we saw with legislative staff during Realtor Day at the Capitol during those visits. But I need to take a step back and commend the policy staff for all the interim work that they did on homeowners associations, because we have those policy committees, and the lobby team doesn't go into session guessing. They have a plan, and they were able to implement it this year because of the climate of the legislature. Trey mentioned that earlier. So this is actually one of my favorite campaigns that we've ever run, or favorite topics that we've ever run realtor engagement on, because I can think of a few, but this is one where, we were kind of firing on all cylinders, and we got to do all kinds of really fun stuff, and the realtors were engaged and staff was fully engaged. And it started with Realtor Day at the Texas Capitol. This was one of the 5 talking points that we gave to our key contacts as they visited with their lawmakers. We saw the feedback that the legislative staff was giving to our key contacts, and that was very encouraging. We used key contacts in a variety of ways as the bills were moving through the legislative process. We contacted committee members with our key contacts, and they did a great job reaching out via email, phone, text, whatever media they had available to them, whatever the best way that their lawmaker had to communicate. And we used those methods and delivered our message. So they were getting it from, of course, the lobby team, which is there at the Capitol every day, working 14, 15-hour days, but they're also getting it from realtor constituents. And that really makes a difference. So Realtor Day at the Capitol, the key contacts, and then in early April, as the bills were going through the legislative process, the lobby team determined that a legislative advocacy campaign was going to be necessary to pass Senate Bill 1588 and House Bill 3367, the HOA reform bills. For this campaign, the legislative staff specifically requested both quantitative data and qualitative data. So we launched a statewide survey that we went out to homeowners and voters across the state, and we wanted to gauge public sentiment on the provisions contained within the original versions of the HOA reform bill. So the results basically confirmed what we thought was going to happen, and showed that the appetite was there for the kind of reforms that we were advocating for, that we had pushed for in the legislature. We were seeing high numbers in the 90s and 80s, upper 80s, low 90s, high 70s for these the different provisions of the bill. We tested each one of them. But we also wanted qualitative data, stories. And we were, the leadership team was wonderful and gave us permission to move forward with a public-facing campaign and a realtor-facing campaign on this. And so we launched myhoastory.com, a site that remains active today, because I think I heard earlier, and I'm delighted to hear it, that we don't plan on backing down. We have future plans for HOA reform, and that's good. This was a giant first step, but the stories that we collected really underscored a lot of the frustrations that you as realtors and your clients have with their homeowners associations. And to be clear, we are not anti-homeowners associations. I think that needs to be said. But we're looking for more property owner friendly and transparency, things like that. And the HOA Stories website is a wonderful channel for that. And so we still encourage you to send this site out to your clients, consumers, colleagues, and tell us your HOA story. You can type your story out, you can record it on video, you can record an audio version of your story, and we're going to be compiling those and sharing them with the policy committees in the interim to see what else we can do. The other thing that I need to mention is the HOA management companies and their efforts at the Capitol. And one of the reasons that the lobby staff determined that we would need to run this campaign was the aggressive tactics used by HOA management companies in the Capitol. I mentioned aggressive. They were, I mean, that actually might be a little bit kind. They were sending a barrage of panic-induced, non-targeted emails, just kind of blanketing the Capitol with anything they could think of, using outdated talking points, scare tactics, all kinds of things that, you know, wasn't really accurate. I mean, they even some of their tactics even included disparaging remarks about Texas Realtors and the lobby staff in general. So it's personal attacks. So, you know, lobby staff said, you know what, we need to do a call for action, and we need to show not only our support from the institution of Texas Realtors, but from individual Texas Realtors as well. So we launched a targeted call for action. And when I say targeted, I mean not like the management companies were doing. We were asking constituents to contact their lawmakers. Now the messaging varied. So for the folks who had either filed the bill or were on the committee, had already voted for it, or were generally supportive or had indicated support, we actually pulled them out and put them into a separate audience so they got more of a thank you, and we didn't inundate their offices with emails. We collected names and cities and were prepared, although I don't know that we ever used it, we were prepared to submit those names to the lawmaker and say, see, these 200 people in your district, you know, they support you. You have the support. For the folks who hadn't heard from individual Texas Realtors, they were just hearing from the management companies. And that was disconcerting. So as I mentioned, the lobby team said, you know what, it's time. Let's press the button. And we did. And you guys, Texas Realtors, responded in the thousands. I mean, it was super impressive to watch. And so, you know, there's a lot of credit to go around on this bill. Certainly what the team at the Capitol did, but also you as Realtors, you really made this happen. And you showed the grassroots support for HOA reform that gave lawmakers the comfort to vote for this bill. And that's, I mean, you can't, there's no way that anyone can match our grassroots when we are firing on all cylinders. And so that's why this is going to become one of those stories that I think we tell for years and years. Going back a couple of years, I can think of it, 2015, the Proposition 1, where we were firing on all cylinders, and we flipped we even on the poll, 50-50 when we launched the poll, and then we ended up passing it with 86% because we really engaged. And it's one of those things that, like the annexation thing or other, not too many when we're actually really going, but we really make a difference. And it's so encouraging as your political director to see that kind of engagement from you as Realtors.
Brandon, let me interrupt. I know we could probably do an entire webinar about the HOA campaign because it was a huge victory with so many moving parts that came together. But we had several other victories too. And, I'd love to get Trey and Julia's input on, let's say, okay, Trey, can you talk to us about the passage of a bill to reform how eminent domain is used in Texas? What can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. That was another key element of our Realtor priorities that we were working on. And that's been a priority that Realtors have been working on for many years. And just in the recent past, the last 3 sessions over the last 6 years, eminent domain has been something that has had a lot of focus on the last number of sessions, and it hasn't been very successful in getting that key legislation passed. Because there's so many people involved in that type of a concept and idea. Eminent domain involves a lot of critical industry. It involves a lot of property owner, different groups from related to the wildlife industry, to large ranch owners, to people involved in oil and gas, people involved in cattle raisers and farm bureau property owners, those kinds of different groups, plus the Realtors, obviously. And so that there's different nuances to those different needs and issues around eminent domain. And so it would always just try to coalesce, and then over 1 or 2 small issues fall apart. And so this year, eminent domain was back at the table again. trying to figure out a way to a solution. And until the realtors got involved, it was kind of in that muck again about whether or not it was going to happen. And so we looked at the bill. We found some problems with the bill that there were issues. And so that provoked us to get more involved. And so we said, we need to solve a couple pieces here. And if we solve those pieces here, let's get fully behind this and let's make it happen. And that's what Texas Realtors did. We knew our members were supportive of it over the last number of sessions, plus a lot of policy discussions around eminent domain and concerns about how property owners are treated during that process, whether or not they are properly notified during that process and have good information to be able to base decisions with the offers that they're getting from these eminent domain entities. And so a lot of that became part of the bill. And once we got involved and helped one solve the issue that we had a problem with and fix that, and then Texas Realtors signed onto the bill, next thing you know, stuff happened. We were able to coalesce a lot of the small ankle biting around some of the smaller issues and force the issue to happen. And guess what? The bill got passed on both sides. And we're happy to say that there's a major piece of legislation, eminent domain reform, that has finally happened. And a lot, I would say, because of realtor involvement and because we've been working on it for so long. And I'm just glad to say that that's kind of done for now. And hopefully we can wait to see how effective it is. And if we need to work on it later, we'll work on it later. But we're really hopeful that this is a good bill that protects property owners through the process and gives them better information to make decisions through that process. And we're excited about that finally happening after 6 years or more.
Sounds like some long overdue changes. Julia, you're on the hot seat. So as we alluded to earlier, property taxes, always a perennial issue at the Texas Capitol. How did the legislature address property taxes this session?
Well, as we saw from that poll, 54% of this audience had property taxes as their highest priority issue. So let me start by saying, just reminding everybody that the state legislature, the state of Texas, does not levy a property tax in any way. It's actually prohibited by our state constitution. So all of the property tax bills that we all get, that all of your clients get, come from local taxing entities, cities, counties, school boards, other special taxing districts. So what the legislature can do is not necessarily put any sort of cap or anything on how much property tax we all have to pay in, but they can put structure around how taxes are collected. So everyone here will probably remember that in 2019, Senate Bill 2 was our giant property tax reform bill that the legislature had been working on since, well, for years, but they had tried it in 2017, both in the regular and in the special session, and weren't able to come to a final agreement on it. So 2019, they spent the interim getting everything together, and they passed Senate Bill 2 that did a whole bunch of things. It was a long bill, but included in that were some provisions that Texas Realtors really supported, which again related to transparency and really trying to make sure that property taxpayers understand that bit that I just said, that their tax bills actually come from local taxing entities, not from the state, not from the central appraisal district either. And one of the ways that they were working on getting that information out was to require central appraisal districts to create websites and send out notices to taxpayers that talked about where the taxing entities were having their meetings, how they were going to be working on their budgets, which ultimately are what result in our property tax bills later on in the year. And so that has been rolling out starting in 2020. Our largest counties had to comply with those website requirements and the property taxpayer notification requirements. Most of the big counties did them in postcards. You probably saw them. You may have gotten asked by friends, neighbors, clients what this was. Is it a real thing? Is it a scam? Is it junk mail? What is it? So there was some confusion around those notifications. And for a lot of, while the biggest counties cover our most of our population, there was a lot of counties that just had that requirement roll out this year. So it's still new for a lot of taxpayers around Texas. But they saw that confusion. People weren't really sure what those notices are and if the information that they were seeing on those websites was accurate, if they went there at all. And this is where I'll pivot for just a second and note that in the absence of some of that clarity, this is when Texas Realtors, led by our Jamie Lee, stepped up and started running our own independent property taxpayer education campaign, knowyourtaxes.org. Check it out if you haven't been there for a while. Back to the legislature, they saw the confusion. They wanted to make sure that people were actually getting this information because it really is valuable, and paying attention to those local taxing entities and having a say in what their levies are going to be is where taxpayers can really have the most significant impact on their ultimate tax bill each year and ongoing. That sets the stage for long term. So the legislature, I think, got wind maybe of knowyourtaxes.org, thought it was a fantastic idea, and decided that it should be something that they do themselves. And so we had a bill that was carried by our Ways and Means Chairman Morgan Meyer and SB2's author in the Senate, Paul Betancourt, and that put some more specificity around what those notices had to say to make sure people understood what they were. But it's also creating a new website that will not be available till January of 2022, so don't go looking for it yet. But in 6.5 short months, hopefully that will be up and running for everybody. And that is going to be texas.gov/property taxes. And it's going to be a central clearinghouse for all of those central appraisal district websites and some other great taxpayer information. So we were glad to see that one get across the finish line.
Cool. Yeah, that was a really good victory. And you're right, the imitation of our knowyourtaxes.org was only flattering. So, well, another way the legislature addressed issues for home buyers was to expand appraisal options. Trey, can you talk to us about this bill and what we can look forward to?
Well, as members, Realtor members, we've all expressed frustration over the lack of appraisals and slow appraisals and lack of access to appraisers and being able to timely get all that work done. There's certainly a chokehold on the amount of appraisers available to be able to do all this great work that we have going on with our membership. There's such high volume of activity, but so few appraisers that are allowed to do loans appraisals, and that's where the big rub is. So there was a piece of legislation that passed to help that a little bit, to expand appraisal options, and that allowed for the expansion of appraisers to perform evaluations, which is kind of a step down version of a full-blown appraisal, but allows evaluations to occur for the purpose of doing a loan. And it's certainly a much quicker process, much faster and easier and less expensive process, which will allow lenders to be able to get the job done. And hopefully this will loosen the blockade that's occurring kind of at that appraisal process, that pain point. And so we're excited that Representative Darby helped to author House Bill 2533 to help expand those appraisal options and allow for evaluations, which was a rule against that before this legislation passed. So we're excited to see that happen. And only time will tell if our members can tell us if it actually helped, but we're looking forward to seeing if that help is going to be beneficial to our members. But we're excited about the opportunity to see if it'll help.
Cool. So hopefully some good things come in there. Julia, back to you. It is rare that a bill passes both chambers with unanimous support across the board, but we actually saw that happen with some important anti-discrimination legislation this session that I believe was just signed into law this week. Senate Bill 30 from Senator Royce West. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Senate Bill 30 is part of a conversation that we've seen kick up actually around the country. I don't have the exact stats off the top of my head, but if I'm making up what I think is an accurate number, it's somewhere between 15 and 20 states have already started tackling the concept of discriminatory deed restrictions. These are a holdover from a long time ago. where deeds might have language in them that say certain people, whether that's based on race, ethnicity, religion, are not allowed to buy or occupy that property. Those discriminatory covenants are already unconstitutional and have been at the federal level, but they still exist in the language, and that has proven to be kind of a hot button issue for a lot of people over the past year. And there was some momentum to try to figure out how to remove that language while still preserving the deed, which is, of course, the living history of the property. And ultimately in Texas, what they came up with, there had already been a process by which you could have certain language removed from your deeds, but it was complicated and essentially involved lawsuits. And so Senate Bill 30 kind of took it down a notch and made it so property owners at their discretion are able to, in more of an administrative way with their county records, remove some of those discriminatory covenants if they so choose. And so, as Jamie said, yeah, that bill was filed. There were versions of it that were filed in the Senate and also in the House. Senate Bill 30 is the one that ultimately moved forward. That was authored by Senator Royce West and joint authored, notably, by every single other senator in the body. And when it came to the House, it also received a unanimous vote, including, and this is just a little procedural fun fact, including from the Speaker of the House. As you all are familiar with running meetings, often the chair can vote, but the chair typically does not. And so you'll see on rare occasion in the Texas House that the Speaker will actually cast a vote usually for, not often against, but for a piece of legislation, and he did so on Senate Bill 30. And there was one change that the House made to the bill, that was to rename it the Senator Royce West Act in his honor for carrying that important legislation. And so that has, as Jamie said, been signed and will be effective September 1st.
Awesome. Let's see, another issue that's certainly close to home for probably everyone on this call is broadband access. And Realtor strongly supported legislation to increase access statewide. And Governor Abbott just signed House Bill 5, I believe yesterday, June 15th, for anyone watching the recording. Trey, could you talk to us about how the legislature addressed broadband access for all Texans?
Absolutely. That was certainly one of our Realtor priorities going into the session. It was something we have been talking about for many years. Just like Texas Realtors, we're always leading even before it becomes cool, because we were talking about broadband access for many years. A lot of our members in the rural areas have complained about the lack of broadband access. And we've talked about the need to make, since Texas is growing, and to make the rural areas more attractive for property owners and for people to live and work there, then broadband was always going to be important. And so that's a message we've always carried. But interestingly enough, COVID comes along and then schools are shut down and broadband becomes extremely important to everyone. Not only just people in the rural areas, but people in metro areas were seeing difficulties with broadband capability due to the amount of usage. And so it was something that became a big part of the legislative agenda. And we were excited to help lead that conversation and support that agenda as well. And Representative Ashby was great in leading that legislation through the process, and was a great spokesperson for broadband. And we're excited to work with him as well as the rest of the legislature to expand that broadband, not only to the inner rural areas, but also the inner metro areas. And there's also part of that bill, there's a body that's being created, a broadband commission, basically, to put emphasis on this. And so what that kind of indicates to us is we're going to see additional funding for broadband in the future, likely because of the input from this group. So it's not going to fix us today, but this is a long-term fix. And we're finally getting to the point where now we're starting to see investment going in that direction. So we're going to see incremental improvement, but we're excited that it's starting now.
Excellent. One of the last sort of sets of issues I wanted to touch on was how realtors, we always support more information for consumers through transparency, through disclosure. And we saw the passage of some bills that were huge wins for Texas real estate consumers. Julie, I'm going to call on you. Will you tell us about the legislation that increases transparency for condo owners? And there was a bill that enhances flood disclosure for tenants. So let's go with condos first, please.
First, and thank you for that, because one of the things I don't think Trey and I said when we were talking about the Homeowners Association Reform Bill earlier was that many of the provisions apply only to certain types of property owners associations. Condos are actually largely governed under a whole separate chapter of code. And so some of the stuff, especially the stuff that got added late on the Senate Bill 1588, do apply to all types, but a lot of it does not. Tune into the legal webinar in July to learn more. Senate Bill 318, though, by Senator Huffman and Chris Turner, again in the House, who became the House's lead guy on property owners associations this session. Senate Bill 318 was designed to make sure that property owners who live in condos associations have much clearer, better access to the documents, all types that govern and govern those entities. And so that has been signed and will be effective also September 1st, which is the routine effective date for most bills, unless the legislature otherwise specifies. So look for more detail on that. That one actually got pretty decent across the board support, did not garner a lot of opposition from any other groups. So we were glad to see that one go through. And then Jamie, you mentioned flood disclosure for tenants. This is an issue that we have been talking about for a long time, but the discussions really intensified after Hurricane Harvey. So there has been some talk in the legislature for several sessions now about adding some type of disclosure, prior flood disclosure for tenants when they rent properties that had not been able to make it across the finish line, in part because it was not always in a place that would work for Texas Realtors and other stakeholders. But this session, we were able to get the bill to a version that we feel will not put a great deal of burden on landlords while still providing the tenants the information that they need. So that was House Bill 531 by Armando Wally. And Senator Huffman carried that in the Senate. And so we're really glad to see that one finally get put to bed, and you'll see that disclosure roll out later this year.
Sounds good. Chairman Jolly, I believe, did you have any comments you wanted to share with us on these issues?
Sure. Thank you, Jamie. So what's so interesting about this is I get questions from members all across the state about how we come to the conclusion on our legislative positions. What was it that brought HOAs to the forefront right now? How did we decide our position on taxation, on eminent domain? Is it something that, Trey Bates and Julia and Brandon and I, Travis Kessler, who is the body of people who decides what our priorities will be? And the great thing about what we do at Texas Realtors is our members make those decisions. Everything starts and ends with our members. And our members who are watching this production today, this conversation today, have the ability to help on our next legislative session. So let me tell you how to do that. If you want to get involved and you want to be at the table and helping to shape the legislative priorities for Texas Realtors, you need to serve on a committee with Texas Realtors. And the great thing is, if you're watching this live, you still have time to sign up. Committee signups for Texas Realtors goes 2 more days. So you have 2 more days through June 18th to sign up. You want to go to texasrealestate.com/committees, texasrealestate.com/committees, sign up for committees. The 4 committees that relate to our public policy positions are taxation, business issues, land use, and infrastructure and utilities. So those are the 4 committees on our public policy arena who look at all of those positions, listen to various consultants, look at the landscape politically, and they're doing that work in the off years. So our next process begins in 2022, where we will be creating white papers, doing research in 2022 in preparation for the legislative session in 2023. So if you want to be part of that process, we'd love for you to go out, sign up for those committees. And also at the same time, make sure that you are involved at a high level in your local realtor association. Serve on your government affairs committee. Get involved in TREPAC at the local level. All those things relate to making sure that we have a very, very successful and effective legislative session.
Excellent, Marvin. Always a good reminder that member engagement is what drives every decision in the organization. Let's see. So we're coming up on time, and I really just wanted to highlight that, yes, of course, engagement, volunteer for a committee, go to texasrealestate.com/committees to get signed up. And the deadline is this Friday, June 18th. So our final question for our lobby team is, what's going to happen this summer? Is there a special session on the radar or two? Trey or Julia, what are you hearing?
Go ahead, Julia.
The short answer is yes, special sessions. We know for certain that there will be at least one because the census data was not available for the legislature to tackle redistricting. It's our understanding that the plan, which can always change, it could change this afternoon. The plan right now is to do a special session related to redistricting and some other federal funding that came out of the pandemic later this fall. But there were a number of issues that did not make it in the regular session that the legislative leadership and the governor may be interested in yet tackling before 2023. And so we're anticipating another one this summer. Rumors abound, but we have no firm detail yet as to when that might actually happen.
But we will certainly keep members apprised. And one thing that our lobby team says is when the legislature's in session, so are they. So they will be on the ground for sure. I wanted to remind this audience that our legal department is having a webinar to dive into what the legislative changes will mean for your business on July 22nd. You can visit texasrealestate.com/events to register now. That concludes our webinar. And if anyone who registered, remember you will get a link to the recording. And I believe we addressed all of the Q&A as we went through the session. So always reach out to your staff or your leadership if you have any questions. Wanted to thank everyone for their time. And Mr. Chairman, may I give you the last word?
Well, thank you, Jamie. I just want to say on behalf of our staff and our leadership at Texas Realtors, we appreciate the engagement, the involvement, and the communication with all 140,000 members across the state. And we need you, we need your voice, we need your engagement and your participation to keep things moving forward for realtors and for property owners across the state. You're the most important member in this entire process, and we want you to be involved. Have a great day.